Literally, I was thinking about it. So the air that comes out of your nose, is that considered your breath?
Hello and welcome to the Neighborhood Money Podcast, a video podcast here to talk about personal finance and helping you build a life you deserve. Drew, episode 35, man. I'm super fired up. This journey thus far has been pretty crazy. A lot of work, a lot more work than I had initially anticipated.
Yeah.
Trying to stay consistent week to week. But man, just reflecting a little bit in the start of the episode here, and I guess it's kind of relevant to the topic of the day, but just looking back at all the stuff we've covered, the people we've had on the podcast, and really just all the fun that we've really had and the connections we've made, it's been quite the journey so far.
It's pretty amazing to think we've got that far. And, for us, it seems like quite the feat. And somebody listening may be say, oh, 35 episodes, that's not too much. But when we only do a weekly episode, I mean, we've been doing it now for 35 weeks, which I think is pretty amazing. I mean, we're, trying to stay consistent where we can and staying with their roots. And I think that we're getting a little bit better on camera and speaking too, because I would have to say, if anybody goes back and watches our original ones,
Whew, they're brutal.
it's bad. I don't even want to go back and watch them myself, but sometimes I have to.
Maybe we'll have a future episode where we relive some of those cringeworthy moments of watching us try to speak to the camera and the video feed from our YouTube. Actually, that'd be kind of fun.
It's kind of making
for a 1 year episode. We'll see what we have planned. We haven't really talked about it.
It's kind of making me hurt thinking about it right now.
But man, this podcast thus far has been a journey, and I think it's a really natural way to introduce our episode today. So today is all about how to start your own financial journey. But before I go more into that, if you are new here to the podcast, I forgot to introduce ourselves. My name is Cavan. I'm one of the hosts. Drew is my co-host of the show. And this podcast is a weekly podcast, like Drew said. And we talk all about financial or personal finance, money, and helping you build that life that you truly deserve. But today is really all about how do you start your financial journey. Drew, I'm over on TikTok quite a bit. We have our Instagram account, and a lot of questions that we get all the time is, where do I start? How do I begin? I'm not really sure what to do. And I think even the people that are outside of our community, outside of our circle, really, really struggle with just getting started. So hopefully today's episode can help them out there.
Kind of this beginning part of it, it's pretty cool because if you're listening to this episode right now, you're already taking that first step. Really the foundation of it is finding some type of a spark or some type of a reason to look at money or your personal finance journey different. And for me personally, I grew up in a household with my dad as a business owner, so I've always found business interesting. When I went off,
Yeah, you just lived around it all the time.
yeah, and that pushed forward even when I went into college. I remember when I was going into college initially, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and my dad and mom was like, "Well, if you go in college, make sure you pick something and stick with it." And my dad also saying, "Accounting's always, very marketable. You'll find jobs. You can be in accounting,
It's a good, safe
finance,
choice.
wherever."
Yep.
So that's what I ultimately stuck with. But even going through that, I really enjoyed the numbers and the business side of accounting. And I was, I guess you could call me kind of a nerd because I went into the
Yeah.
the finance club and
Drew,
the accounting.
we have a personal finance podcast. Let's be honest, we're finance nerds. If we're going to be really 100% transparent here.
That's true. So I guess that's out of the way. But so I suppose I stuck true to that finance nerd type of stuff, and I took finance clubs and the accounting club, and we learned a little bit of like stock trading and just networking and all that type of stuff. So it's kind of been with me, but I also understand not everybody has that type of environment growing up in, or they don't even know about getting a certain spark. So I think coming to this is huge, but I even think something that helped me even move more forward is that Rich Dad Poor Dad that we talk about so much. But even then, you might have somebody that doesn't want to take the step because it takes so long. But the nice thing is with technology is people will summarize this stuff for you. So you could just go on to YouTube and get in a rabbit hole, or if that Rich Dad Poor Dad something you wanted to do. I typed in Rich Dad Poor Dad on YouTube. Somebody summarized it in 7 minutes. So if you don't have 7 minutes, then you still don't have the spark.
But you're totally right. Like personal finance can be so mundane, so dry to so many people that if you can find that spark, and most likely, like Drew, you said, people are listening to this podcast already have that spark because why the heck would they come look up a personal finance podcast if they weren't interested in already? But I think it's something that you truly have to hold on to. And so whether it's your journey through college, like you, Drew, my journey I've talked about in the past about getting out of debt and just a massive amount of student loans, or maybe it's even like you're in a new stage of life and you realize like, hey, I'm no longer in my 20s, I need to start saving and investing, but I don't know where to go, and that spark kind of hits. And I think that really helps you really truly just build that foundation, even though you're not really learning anything when that spark hits, but it is something that's going to give you momentum to really drive you forward and hopefully then take you down these 6 steps that we've put together to help you start on your own financial journey. So, Drew, if we start with the first step, that is to really just figure out what your current financial situation is.
Yeah, we've had previous episodes of net worth, and that's pretty much what this is. But I think sometimes even saying the word net worth can seem intimidating. But really, what we're trying to do here, and maybe doesn't hit necessarily on net worth, but we want to see your current situation. And this is as easy as looking at your checking account, your savings account, how much debt you have, and that is ultimately what your net worth is. We want to see your current financial situation of yourself, what you have at that point in time.
Yeah, I gotta be honest, Drew. The debt piece, that one is, I think, such a roadblock for so many people. People are very much aware that they're in debt. But I think what a lot of people struggle with is maybe they have some student loans, maybe they have a car payment, maybe they have a mortgage, maybe a little bit of credit card debt if they're like a very average American. But what most people don't do is they don't consolidate that all, not consolidate the loans per se, but consolidate all of your loans onto a piece of paper. So you can just look at it and say, wow, like I've got all this debt that I was aware of. But when I look at the total amount, it can be mind popping, or eye popping. And I think that is very crucial to really understand what your current situation is, because that's going to help you drive forward and to hopefully, you can look at it and be like, well, I'm very far off of where I thought I was and where I need to go.
Yeah, and the nice thing with this is yes, you're working with numbers, but it doesn't have to be like, oh, I have to go an Excel sheet. You could literally, if you wanted to, be sitting at a bar, get a piece of pen, write on a napkin, because everything's so mobile now. So you can have all that information right on your phone, and you could just take that piece of pen or that pen and that piece of paper and just write down line by line what it is and be able to see it. So you don't have to be this big expert in numbers or love numbers or be, big into math. It's just something as easy as, pretty much reading a book and taking notes.
Gosh, Drew, I think the best story that I've heard, and I forget who it was, and I forget what podcast it was on. This was several years ago now, but it still sticks with me to this day. This person was explaining their financial journey, and they were sitting in a hotel room, and they grabbed, how in the hotels you get those like piece, or you used to, I don't even know if you do anymore. You probably don't, but you used to get like the handwritten notepads next to the bed, and you get the pen. Well, they actually went on to all of their debts, so student loans, mortgage, car payments, and they wrote down all their debts. And that moment, they realized how much debt they were actually in, and it completely changed their life. So I guess the crux of that story is it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what tools you have available. You just need a pen and paper to really understand what your current situation is, and you could just move from there.
If I can add something kind of funny into that, is I'm gonna grab this right now, and this is completely unplanned, but it's funny you bring this up. I'm gonna make sure this can show up on the camera. But this pen is St. Paul Hotel,
Okay.
and it's like one of my favorite pens. So whenever I
Yeah.
go to that hotel for like a beer meeting, uh, I would just like take them every morning. So when housekeeping came, they'd replenish it and then I would keep having it. So I still have that pen to this day. And I almost thought it was ruined. My brother in law, when we were on vacation, decided to take it apart for some reason and throw it away. But then he made things right and grabbed it and put it back together. So I can still use my favorite St. Paul hotel pen.
So you're saving on your monthly pen expenses by being a little thief from the St. Paul Hotel.
You pay enough for those rooms.
That reminds me of like the Friends episode. I don't know if you watch Friends, but when Ross he goes to hotels and he just like takes all the free stuff and he's telling Chandler about like what's appropriate and what's not appropriate to take. And Chandler, I'm probably gonna get this wrong, but Chandler would be like, "How about the lamp?" And Ross is like, but you can take the light bulb."
And he's like, "So the salt, you can't take the salt shaker, but you can take the salt inside."
Yep, yep. See, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, step number one, so important to understand what your current financial situation is. So, calculating, how much money you have in your accounts, your 401ks, and all that stuff, like you said, knowing how much debts you have and how much money you owe to people. So, then if we go to step number two, that's actually knowing where is your money going. So, looking on both historically how you've spent your money, but then also starting to track your income and your expenses.
Yeah, and the amazing part about this is once you get to this part, you're really pretty much 2 steps in. You've had a spark, you know your current situation, so this snowball going down the hill is starting to gain some steam. And this is really where as you start to categorize and do historical um audits almost, or you just be able to look at what your transactions have been in the past, I think is so important. And sometimes I think you might even see this as intimidating as well, because you have all these transactions and we say, the best thing you can do is categorize them. But how do you categorize so many transactions, especially if you've never did it before? Some things we've talked about in the past was, your wants, your needs, and your savings. That's an easy way to categorize. It's just three different categories. And another one that I think about too is, what are your fixed bills? So, and then what are your variable bills? And then what money's left over that you just spend on random stuff. I think that's an easy way of categorizing your stuff too. So, on a month to month basis what you actually need to put out, and then what's kind of left over and what you're able to do with that money.
At the end of the day, it's really just getting together a budget. And it doesn't have to be a budget in a very rigorous sense. It can be really any way you want to manage your money, whether that's opening up three different bank accounts and putting in necessities into one bank account, wants or wants your spending account into another, then savings and investing into another, or the things that Drew just talked about. But it's really understanding where your money is coming in from and then where it's going. And I think, Drew, when you look back at what you're actually spending your money on, I think it's a really, really, really good opportunity to kind of take a step back and be like, hey, does this align with what's valuable to me? Does this align with how I actually want to spend my money and spend my time? Because it's so easy, right, to kind of get out of hand, and all of a sudden, maybe this is pretty cliche, but maybe your target bill each and every month is like $500 to $1,000, and it's not because you're buying groceries and food and stuff you need and maybe a little bit of what you want, but it's because you're picking up a couple things here, a couple things there. And you're like, hey, actually, that stuff doesn't provide me value. I'd rather get value doing this other stuff. So that's why I think it's so important to really understand how you're spending your money, specifically when you're starting out, because you can just kind of step back and be like, hey, does this align with how I want to live my life? Does this align with what I truly find valuable?
I also think when you're going back looking at historical transactions that you've made, it brings a sense of connection with your money too. You're present with your money. You're now looking at where it's going. I think sometimes even with credit cards or just on your month to month, it's so easy to just uh it's only $10, so I'll swipe the card. Or, oh, I just got a Facebook ad for something that looks pretty cool. I might just buy it because like I have money in the account. And I think being able to look back and be like, wow, how much money did I actually put towards just random stuff, or those little $10 things add up to, $400 during this month or $200 during the month. So I think just being aware and present with your money, I think, is another eye-opening event, as like the step previous of seeing maybe how much debt you have in bulk or how much cash you have actually in your account. So I think that's just another important thing to open your eyes and be present with where your money's going.
You really need to just build and flourish that relationship with your finances and your money. And I think that really scares a lot of people. I think people get intimidated when they say, well, I know that I'm doing okay, but I'm don't even want to open up my credit card statement. I don't even want to look at my accounts because I don't want to know how much I actually spent. So I think fostering that relationship with your money is a huge part here, Drew, like you were just saying. Building that relationship, getting really fun, in tuned with how you're spending your money, because then you can just be more intentional going forward and spending it the way that truly brings you value and truly brings you happiness, you know, starting today and then 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and so on. And so that kind of brings us into step three, Drew, is, looking forward. So step three is to figure out what your true focus is with your finances, on your what your true focus is of your financial journey, and really starting to set some of those financial goals.
This step, it starts to get a little gray for me. I would have to say the first couple of finding a spark, seeing what your current situation is, looking at what you've spent in the past, I think are a great foundation for anybody starting personal finance. Now, looking at what you want to do with your money, what your goals are for the future, whether it be as micro as looking within your bank accounts and how much cash you want, or is macro as where do you want to see yourself in the future? Do you see yourself in the same zip code? Do you see yourself at the same company? These are all questions that really come up that will help incubate where your journey is going for your personal finances. So I think that's pretty interesting to think about.
Yeah. So when you're starting to think about what your financial journey looks like going forward, how do you start to set goals? I think we can provide, some thoughts on how we do it personally, Drew. But, one thing to think about is start to have conversations with someone. Try to find a partner or a friend or a family member, maybe your spouse, specifically your spouse if you're married, right? Try to be on the same page, but really start just having those conversations. And when you start talking about this type of stuff, you're going to really start gravitating towards what's important. And specifically if they have gone through this journey, or they maybe are a couple steps ahead of you, they might be able to provide some guidance. Definitely listening to this podcast, hopefully you get some ideas around maybe what you should think about when setting some of your financial goals and starting off and figuring out what your true focus is. So Drew, with that, what are some of the things that you think about or have thought about when you started on your financial journey, really setting forward what that focus was and what some of those goals were?
One of the big things for me is I didn't want to really be handcuffed with any type of debt or being really dependent on paycheck to paycheck. And so when that was in my thought, like building an emergency fund was important to me, because if I ever got in a situation where I didn't have a job, or I wasn't trading well, whatever it may be, that I had a cushion. I wasn't just sweating right when something happened. So I think that little bit of security was important to me. And then also with, the reduction of debt or the elimination of debt, for one, it opens up a lot of cash flow during the month, which is great. And two, you don't have that obligation to pay that every single month. So that money can either be saved or put towards something different, whether it's towards your business, towards your investing, or, really towards education.
Yeah.
Really, I think
Or
that's,
maybe it's even going on a trip,
yeah.
or a little bit nicer of a trip each and every year. Maybe it's building up that happiness equity that we talked about in prior
Yeah.
episodes.
So that was one of my big thoughts. I mean, there's a lot of different things you can go through, whether it be uh, maybe your big goal is you want to retire by a certain age. And then that comes into question. I mean, that's a great first start for a goal, but does that mean now you're going to be putting more towards your investments, your 401ks or your IRAs? Is that mean you're adding a side hustle to your situation? Is it cutting back expenses? Is it all the above? So I think those are things to think about. Is if you wanted to retire at a certain age, you can have that goal, and then you can kind of reverse engineer bringing it back and taking piece by piece and seeing exactly how to do it. So those are two thoughts initially that come to my mind for this section.
Yeah, a couple of other things that I would say when you're specifically thinking about your focus and your goals is think about large purchases too. Think about if you want to buy a house someday, if you're going to get married, if you're going to have children, if you want to pay for your children's education in the future, just to name a couple more things to just start thinking about, because that's all important. And it's really easy to just say, okay, what do I want in the next year? What do I want in the next 5 years? But can you start thinking a little bit further than that? I know my family, we really think about long term, like more so retirement or early retirement investing, so that we can better set ourselves up in the next, for the next 2 decades or whatever it's going to be until we retire. We also think about savings for our kids' colleges and things like that. In addition, Drew, to what you talked about with eliminating debt, building up an emergency fund and all that stuff. So I think it's really important to take that big holistic picture. And like I said, if you're by yourself, try to find that accountability partner that you can start talking with. But Drew, since now we figured out what some of our goals might be, figured out what our focus is with our financial journey, step 4 is then to create a plan that's going to help you achieve some of those goals.
I think the first thing I want to start out with here on this section is remember whatever this goal is for you or your plan that's being set up, it's not set in stone till the end of time. All right. Your goals will change, your plans will change, but we're just talking your baby steps getting into it, your current situation of where you want to be at with your goal. So, setting up a plan is definitely important. These are something where once this plan is, it helps to write it down because it's in your mind a little bit better, but you maybe want to revisit these on a monthly basis, at least when you're starting out, because you want to be able to make sure your money's going in the correct area. It's going according to plan. And then as far as those big overarching goals, maybe that's something that you can come back to on a year basis and seeing, have your goals changed within that last year? Has your employment changed within that year? Um, are you having a kid on the way? So these are all things that end up happening. So being able to have something written down and looking back on and keeping yourself accountable in any way you can definitely helps, because there's a lot of times when you have it in your mind that you say you're going to do it, but it's kind of easy to let that just slide and kind of go to the back of your head.
Hannah and I talk probably once a year closely about our goals, or just more so revisit to make sure we're on the same page or on the same path, or both of those together. I suppose they're not separate. But to give you a little bit better of an idea of how can you develop a plan, here's how we did in my family. So we were in a lot of student loan debt coming out of college. We had a couple of car loans, and so we generally were about $120,000 in debt. And that was kind of crippling for us. One, because it's such a huge weight on our shoulders to be in that much debt. But then two, we knew it was going to limit what we truly wanted in our life. So what we said in that point in time when we were first starting on our financial journey together, we said, okay, our job is to get out of debt first. And so we're going to put off everything besides getting out of debt. And that truly meant like, we're going to delay investing for retirement. We are going to limit, or if not eliminate, doing things like going out to eat, going on vacations. Actually, we didn't go on a vacation during that time period. And we were laser focused on eliminating debt. We got through that time period, and we knew then that, hey, okay, well, that was a mountain we had to climb, but we're still so young on this journey. Now we need to reset, and we need to say, okay, well, what are now our goals? We were so laser focused for 18 months. How do we now transition to start looking long term? And then that's then when we started saying, okay, well, what do we want for our house? Like, do we want to move in the next 5 to 10 years? At the time we got out of debt, we had one child, but are we going to expand our family? Does that mean like different vehicles? Does that mean more rooms in the house? But then even beyond that, we started thinking, okay, well, what does retirement look like for us? How big of a retirement do we want? When do we want to retire? And all of those things started accumulating into what our actual plan is. And then because we had all of that set forward, we could say, hey, we know we need to pay or invest this much money per month. We know we need to save this amount of money for a new house or whatever it might be. And then we kind of just started all working that into together, and took our budgeting as well as that long-term vision, and it kind of just collectively became what our plan was. So hopefully that gives you some sense of how you can think about it from your standpoint.
So when you were laser focused on the debt side of it, when that was coming to an end or came to an end, were you at any part of like a limbo of where do I go from here, or where do I educate myself from here? Like, were you out on YouTube a lot after that, or I guess what were your next steps after you really eliminated that debt?
Yeah, no, not necessarily. Not a limbo. I will say that this was kind of shocking to me, but when we got out of debt, it was, and I probably shouldn't say this from a personal finance podcast, but it was a lot less satisfying than I thought it would be, right? No one showed up to our house with like, you know, air poppers and balloons and like trumpets playing like, hey, good job, like you guys got out of all this debt. And you know that doesn't happen. You kind of just continue to live your life, you know, debt free, which is a huge weight off the shoulders, but it's definitely underwhelming. But anyways, because I've always really have been into personal finance ever since like the middle of my college years, I was very well versed on investing the way I wanted to, you know, what my true financial plan was going to look like. But, you know, I will say that I started investing right away out of college. Our debt payoff journey didn't start till Hannah graduated, which was a couple years after me when we got married. But yeah, so then when we got out of debt, it was okay. Well, one, we have no money, but two, like I have a general idea of like, or I'm fairly well versed in like investing and all the different types of accounts and like generally what we want to do. So there was no like limbo, and I recognize that, you know, I'm privileged in that sense, but I definitely see that being a huge, you know, barrier for a lot of people after you've been so laser focused paying off debt, and now how do you like tackle this next mountain of planning for retirement or whatever your goals are.
I find it interesting with this podcast, especially having people on. It's, you know, as we just said, like these goals aren't set in stone. You kind of want, you know, different things come at you and they switch your thought process. And really, uh, having this podcast and all these different interviews and talking to these people and seeing their different situations, it's really eye opening to really what else is out there. I mean, it gets more rabbit holes for for us to go down. I mean,
Yep.
I feel like I felt like I knew a lot of different ways of making money or setting yourself up for the rest of your life. And then talking with more of these people, I get so energized talking with them. And then they give you a little bit tidbits here and there. And it's so nice to keep adding all that to um, our thoughts. And like eventually, even they kind of start switching to goals a little bit too, which is, I think, pretty cool.
It's so refreshing to continuously hear, whether it's people that we interview, us talking amongst each other, listening to other podcasts, but it's so refreshing to hear that basically everyone starts in the same place. Everyone at some point in their life was intimidated by money, by finances. To some degree, obviously, some people are much more intimidated than others, but everyone starts from ground zero. And it really just, people are on different journeys and they're on different stages of their journey. So whether you're starting brand new, and hopefully this podcast is helping you get your start, or maybe you're 3-4 steps down the line, just know that everyone has gone through this process, and you know, people have continuously shown that you can be very successful at truly building wealth, which is generally what this podcast is all about. But hopefully also continue to increase your knowledge. But Drew, so if we move to step number 5, that is, you've kind of already mentioned it in the last step, but this is now to revisit your goals each and every year and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, so I guess we brought up a little bit in that last one, but it is important to come back and really revisit your plans that you had. As we were just speaking, life comes at you a little bit. Um, you have different changes, and these are the times when you might be looking for a house now. You might enjoy your job, so when you initially thought you're going to be traveling all around and you're going to stay with this place, that could be something that could change within that year. And then that's a time for you to then look at your, you know, your plan. You've already been looking at your transaction, you know where your money's going. You have your net worth, that's all set up. And it allows you to make these little tweaks on your plan and your goals that will eventually, you know, help your success and your journey going forward.
My general thought on this step is definitely set up at least one time a year where you are going to actively look at your goals, whether it's by yourself, with your spouse, with an accountability partner. But then if you have any of those life events like you were talking about, like buying a house, having a child, maybe getting a new job, or staying in a location when you were planning on moving, those are good times to then revisit the goals. So maybe in a given year, you are revisiting it twice, but to make sure that you're at least aligned going forward from whatever big life event you have had, or on your yearly, we'll just call it your financial journey meeting. Maybe we can coin that, Drew. But in your, your annual financial journey meeting, um, it's so important to make sure that you're driving forward to hit your milestones, to hit those goals that you've already set in the prior step.
And really with these goals that you have, it's a time to even benchmark, as you're revisiting it, whether it's tweaks or not. It does, like you said, gives you that opportunity to see, this is where my forecasted projections were. Where am I? Am I above it? Am I below it? Am I further on my debt journey? Was there something that happened during that year unexpectedly? And then those are also times that, it helps with the tweaking, because this is where I should have been. This might be where I'm at. What was the reason for it? How can I change it going forward?
And I think that brings us nicely, Drew, and segues us nicely into step number 6. And that's, life's going to come at you unexpectedly. So you need to be able to adapt, to adjust, and always continue to be a forever learner, and let really education guide you down your path. And, if appropriate and necessary, or if appropriate, allow yourself to go down rabbit holes. And really, Drew, just enjoy the journey, because we obviously only get one life. Your finances is a huge part of that life, so make sure that you're enjoying the journey along the way. Fall in love with the process and not just the end result.
I mean, you said that perfectly there. I mean, really, really, when I think about being a continuing learner, it's funny how humbling it becomes. You find some things maybe you like and you don't, or maybe some things that you thought you knew very well, and then you soon find out you know jack squat pretty much.
Right, right, right.
But I think the cool thing with these potential rabbit holes you go down is this episode like this, I hope, can be a good spark for your next spark. And then you kind of can move around and say, do I like the debt side? Do I like the investing side? Do I like the entrepreneur side? And then with the technology you have at your fingertips with Google and YouTube and really everything else, it's so easy to just slowly go, okay, I'm going to check in this area. Oh, there's a big tree branch. I'm going to go down this way. And like, oh, there's another tree branch there. So I'm going to go down over here. And I don't like that. So I'm going to go back up over here. And I think it's so cool that you can constantly learn and then slowly make your goals and your focus even more focused on the things that you really enjoy. And that will ultimately help you stay on your goals and your track, because if you don't enjoy this, you're probably going to do it for a couple months and then forget about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think we need to differentiate between, like you were saying, like learning, the rabbit hole of learning, and the goals. So, just one thing to note is, you set your goals because you're focused on your long-term vision. This rabbit hole learning is just to broaden your horizons. One thing you need to be aware of, or at least conscious of, is kind of the shiny object syndrome. Don't just keep adjusting your goals because you see a new shiny object. An example would be if you were investing into index funds because that's what you want for your retirement, and all of a sudden you just flip script because Bitcoin becomes hot, and then all of a sudden you flip script again because you think you might want to get into real estate. That's not necessarily what we're saying here. We're saying continue to be a lifelong learner, and then adjust your goals as you become more laser focused, Drew, like you were saying, and making sure that your goals truly align with what you like and what you really truly think is going to benefit you in the long term.
And as you say that, I have to admit that on my journey, I will get the shiny object syndrome
I'm
every
the same
every once
way.
in a while, but I have to keep myself in check and stick with the certain goals. But I think that just ultimately happens because you see something that you've never seen before, and you go, "What the heck is this?" Um, but just
Yeah.
just be conscious of that, and make sure you don't constantly hop around, and you can stick to a certain type of goal.
Right. Or just adjust your goals slowly as you take in this wealth of knowledge. So, Drew, we talked about sparking your interest to get started on your financial journey because you're listening to this podcast. That already has happened. So we welcome you to our community. Hopefully, we continue to grow or help you grow in your financial knowledge and help you along your financial path. But so really the key steps to starting out and how to get started in your financial journey then is to figure out what your current situation is, find out where your money is going, figure out what your focus is, what your interests are, and and what your goals are in the long term. Then setting up a plan to help you achieve those goals. Continue to revisit those goals each and every year and adjust accordingly depending on life changes or if maybe something else has happened in your life. And then the last step is to just have some grace and understand that life's going to come at you in unexpected ways, be able to adjust and adapt accordingly. And then also just continue to be a lifelong learner, go down your rabbit holes if you want, and just make the financial journey actually just truly fun and try to enjoy it and get less focused on the outcome and just more focused on the process. And it's going to be a heck of a lot more fun along the way. And hopefully the Neighborhood Money podcast can continue to join you on that journey.
We'd love to.
So it's officially springtime here in Minnesota. That means that more than likely, we and our families are starting to get out a little bit more outside. It's starting to warm up a little bit, but with the welcoming of spring, what has been going on in the neighborhood?
Wow, it's been kind of boring for me now that I've been back in Minnesota, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think I brought some warm weather with, so that was nice. But it just recently snowed up here yesterday and today. Really, really heavy snow because it came down and it's still kind of warm. So it's like melty and kind of heavy. But
I mean, you have to have snow in spring. Otherwise, it's truly not a Minnesota spring.
yeah, I felt like every time we'd like go out for baseball practice in the spring,
Yeah.
it was like, oh, everything's looking good. First practice outside, and like, nope, it snowed, so we won't be
Yep.
able to for another couple weeks. But
Basically, like shoveling off the outfield and the infield to make sure that we can actually practice and play.
that's pretty much what it was. But I mean, really, when it was nice weather, Jordan and I were able to get out for a couple walks with the baby. He was kind of, I think he wasn't used to as much inside time as we got back. So we'd bring him out for some fresh air, and he was totally good. And he'd
He's just used to the nice warm weather.
Yep, he just needs fresh air, so he got him up in his little like teddy bear onesie thing that to
Nice.
keep him warm outside. But he
Yeah.
just was looking around and staying warm and just like and smelling in the fresh air. But yeah, so pretty boring over here. I started watching a new Netflix series called Meat Eater, and it's a guy
Okay. I've never
that's
heard of it.
guy that just a lifelong hunter. He's made a podcast out of it, and he had I think probably stuff on YouTube before, but it's on Netflix now. And he goes out on these pretty crazy hunts, whether it's in the ocean spearfishing or up in the mountains shooting a mountain goat, and then so that's like the whole journey in the beginning of it, and then at the end he finds a way of cooking it in a way that makes it look more appetizing or just kind of some funkier ways of eating wild game, which is pretty cool. And then he ties it
Is he kind of the one that's gonna like have the kill and then cook it in the woods on like a stump and like use a rock to like cut the meat, or is it like actually he just brings it back to a kitchen?
a little bit of both. A little bit of
Oh,
both,
okay.
depending on where he's
Nice.
at. So sometimes it's like right out in the middle of the woods. Sometimes they'll bring back to a nice little kitchen. Sometimes they'll bring in like a chef that is known for cooking wild game. So I feel like I got a few ideas. And then the cool thing is, and then he
You're gonna
wraps.
be out hunting mountain goats, and we're gonna have a video of you just like building your own little fire and like cutting down a tree to use that as a plate and
I'll have the savings go for those trips, and then we can just do it on all the stuff. But yeah,
there you
so
go.
so yeah, no, it's kind of cool, and he wraps it in with like a little analogy at the end of how it relates to his life. And cool guy, pretty cool episodes. So that's really what's going on in my neighborhood. So not a
Nice.
whole lot since I've been back in
I might have
Minnesota.
to check it out tonight. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, anything really crazy going on in your household or
So, Drew, I don't know if you know this. I don't know if you've been on social media, but gas prices are a little high right now, right? Uh, and so Hannah and I and our children were out having dinner because dad forgot to cook. So we had to do an emergency going out to eat, which isn't great, but it was still delicious. But our youngest was a little bit fussy at the dinner table, and we got in the car to go home, and we were driving and she was quiet, and I looked at Hannah and I'm like, should we just keep driving and like just like kind of take in this quietness?
Yeah.
And so Hannah's like, hey, we need to go get gas. Why don't we go to Costco? Because Costco saves a quarter a gallon when you're a member
Oh,
there.
wow.
Well, you have to be a member there to get it. But so I'm like, oh, that's not a bad idea. Like Costco's like a 10-minute drive from our house. We'll just go save a quarter per gallon, which ultimately is probably washes even by the time you drive there and back. But anyways, so we're driving and we drive past our turn off, and probably 5 minutes later, our youngest just starts screaming. But at that point, we are committed. So we drove with a screaming. She's almost a toddler now. We drove with the almost toddler screaming to Costco, 10 minutes. I pumped the gas. Hannah was in the car while our youngest was screaming. Get back in, drive home, screaming for like 30 minutes. And not
Oh,
only
boy.
not only was our drive there 10 minutes, I took like 3 wrong turns because I have no idea why. I've driven to Costco about 1,000 times at this stage, but for some reason completely forgot the
Well,
route.
you're
So I
disoriented. You have a
added,
screaming baby.
yeah, so completely forgot how to actually get there. At least got us in the right direction. But yeah, so we finally got home, got out of the car, and just like had to like take like 3 seconds before we opened up the car doors to get our kids, and just be like, oh man, that was like gonna be a perfect idea to one of the worst decisions I've made in a while.
Right when you think you got to figure it out, they just toss a wrench in it. I got two things that kind of add to that. Well, it made me think about it while you're talking. One is our 4.5-month-old just popped 2 teeth. So that's kind of cool. I mean, he's definitely drooling a lot. And when they popped, he was screaming, not too happy with it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure not.
And the second thing is, I don't know if you saw on my Instagram, my personal uh, page, but on the story, I was with Jordan last night and I had a random thought. There's like a shower thought.
I saw you put this out
Yeah.
on Twitter.
And it's like literally, I was thinking about it. So the air that comes out of your nose, is that considered your breath? Like, I feel like if you breathe in through your mouth and breathe out, that's a breath. If you breathe in through your nose and breathe out, is that still your breath? Or if you breathe in through your mouth and through your nose? So it's like called nose breath, nose air.
I don't even know. I remember when I saw that, I was like, I don't have an answer for this, because when you say breath, you think like in your mouth, out your mouth. Like the nose never comes into the conversation.
Yeah. So what considers breath?
I'm sure there's a scientific definition out there, but it's more fun to not know that.
And I promise people listening, I was not smoking anything funky or drinking. It's just a random thought, like, what the heck?
If you're listening to this podcast and you know if breathing in and out of your nose is considered breath, or if it has a different name, let us know. Reach out to us on Instagram, shoot us up with a DM, and tell us, because we obviously are baffled and have no idea.
Yeah. So now it's kind of like a funny inside joke at the house. That wraps up episode 35 of the Neighborhood Money Podcast. We went through steps that we think can help you start on your personal financial journey, between getting that spark, figuring out your current situation, finding out where your money's going, setting your goals, setting a plan, revisiting these plans, and roll with the punches. All were very interesting, cool steps that we hope that as they're broken down, they're easier to digest and implement in your personal life. We hope you can do that. We want to thank you again for listening to this episode. If there's any type of help that you guys might need, reach out to us. We'd love to help where we can. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Give this episode a like, and we will see you next week in the neighborhood.